Okay, so this is the first video in my playlist about Jeremy Corbyn. Now basically, if you want to understand how power relations are driving crisis, what you can in the situation that we have, or in a social work assessment, but you know, political economy falling apart because of inequality is another thing. What you need, what I need the institutional context. I need to be able to keep an eye on the crisis as it's growing so I can see cycles and things that are emerging and patterns. And if I'm really lucky, I need something preventing the situation being addressed. And if you give me those things, I can start to build a picture. So until 2010, I think I still describe myself as a lefty. I didn't know what that meant. And then when austerity began, I was recruited by the students who are now at the heart of Navarra to speak at Oxford University. I was invited to write for the press, so you can find my stuff in the New Statesman and the Guardian. And I was invited to speak at a labour and trade union event called Netroots, which I'm going to post a video from underneath so you can see what I said. And quite quickly, I realised that what I was going to be given was the barrier to crisis being addressed, quite a serious barrier, because their behaviour to me, and some of these videos, when I describe some of this behaviour, it's fucking shocking. Like, this is a culture of people who have never had to mix. So I took them at face value. I said, you know, they wanted to fight austerity, I wanted to fight austerity, and then they made clear to me very, very quickly that they would be reproducing the left-wing identity, which by now we've got an 8-year demonstration which I can refer back to, and as they've upheld welfare cuts, as I said that they would way back in 2010, you know, largely all I've really observed with the Guardian, the New Statesman, the Labour Party and the trade unions over the last 8 years is how they have reproduced their class identity. And that's now playing out in very, very dangerous ways. Now, my interest in this is because I know that actually observing the behaviour of a mediating class, which is like a tribal stabilising function, at the end of a cycle, as it starts to generate instability, is really important. So my record is not concerned with Corbyn now. My record is kept because this is actually quite important stuff, and it has implications that go a long way beyond who gets into Westminster. And this actually is very important information for how we transition through periods where we're reaching the end of a consensus, which is what's happened. It's very, very, you know, the context has changed around systems, we're generating crisis. And it's really important to understand at this point how it is that a mediating class prevent, you know, the relevant adaptation. So that's what they're providing to me. However, because this elite social culture with these institutions, they've demonstrated the elite social closure of the power of labour. They've told me why I never had a trade union. They've demonstrated that when they introduce a social dimension to political communication, they reproduce abusive relations, which we can see on Twitter, and I'm going to describe that. And they've also just actively facilitated austerity while identifying against as opposing it. And they are very unique, our current left are unique in neoliberal media class, because this is the first generation. The culture around Corbynism and Navarra are the very, very first generation of media class who, when they were selling this toxic consensus, were asked not to, in person, on a public record. And that's what I've been trying to keep for about the last 8 years, is a record to show that they absolutely knew all the way along. And, you know, this culture have now actively facilitated like 100,000 deaths. That, you know, that once we're going to have to start looking at the death toll from welfare reform and from local authority changes. We have major system failure that we can't address because all the political machinery that should be alerting us are preoccupied with the left. So what I'm going to do with this playlist is, step by step, I'm going to use our current left, who are in their toxic little bubble on Twitter, as a case study, is the best way to approach it. Often I may illustrate this case study with examples from my interactions with them because that's where I met them. That's not because it's the best way, you know, This just happens to be my interaction with them. So this is from my perspective. And I'm going to, over the course of this playlist, I'm going to describe the different stages in facilitating austerity and generating the toxicity that you see, you know, around anti-Semitism, around the TERF. I mean, TERF is just the latest incarnation from these people, and they'll keep on going. So one of the useful things is when I describe what they do in these videos, they will continue to demonstrate what I'm saying. And then you can use these videos to look at what they're doing and to learn from what they're doing, which is what I've been doing for the last 8 years. And I'm going to do this playlist probably, I always say like 2-3 weeks, but once I start doing it, they come together within like quite a short period of time. So I reckon I'll be done in under a week. And then the playlist will just sit as a record that you can use to understand the processes that they're demonstrating. Now, while my concern is more abstract and is more about the cyclical nature of things and the function that they place, I'm also aware of how dangerous they are, partially because of the way that they have treated me, partially because of the way that they have facilitated austerity, and partially because of what they keep unleashing onto women and now Jewish people on Twitter. And I'm aware that Jeremy Corbyn and the culture that I'm discussing around The Guardian, The New Statesman, and Jeremy Corbyn and Navarro, they are a direct risk of fascism. I'm not going to mince my words. You know, the culture that I met in 2010 will, if they are allowed to get to Downing Street, cause immeasurable harm. And what this playlist is, it's a description of how an elite narcissistic media culture facilitate austerity over 8 years, regardless of the cost, to try and get to Downing Street. And it's about how an elite media culture, at the end of this cycle, have exploited inequality to generate instability. And because the left were used as a barrier to discussing austerity, we now have no solutions, and we have to go through institutional breakdown and massive instability and hopefully learn from crisis. And these people are the barrier, and it needs to be identified. So I'm going to start doing that now. This is the first video of this playlist, and I'm going to build it up over, I don't know, a week or whatever. And then I'm going to leave it as a playlist that you can use to watch, to reference how they're behaving on Twitter, because they won't change. They're protecting a false identity and they're going round and round in circles, so they can't do anything else but what they're doing. And hopefully there won't be enough instability that they get to Downing Street, but they want there to be. And I think it's important to understand what that means and the threat that they pose to democracy itself.